We are live now, and I'm just going to see if everything is working on our Facebook page and if the live has been posted. And I'm just going to look at the link. Just going to see if everything is working on. Yes, and you can probably see that the link has reached you also, so you can reshare it. I have.
Yeah.
And also, let me share it on our Facebook, on our Twitter, so that people can join us from our Twitter, and then we will talk with.
So how does one just one copy paste?
Yes, if you just copy paste it on your Facebook post and then post it, you will on your post.
Also, let me share it on our Facebook, on our Twitter.
So copy. So what do you do? What do I do? Just post it on Twitter.
On Twitter and Facebook. And you can put a comment there if you want.
All right. Yeah, in conversation with Taha. Okay.
Okay, I have also put it on Twitter, and we will just begin in just a second. Yes. Right. So thank you for joining us today, Ms. Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. And basically, the idea behind this talk is to sort of do these kind of weekly talks, actually, and you're going to be my first one today, and on the platform of South Asia Press, which is sort of a media outlet that I self-manage and I self-run. And the idea behind it is to focus on issues which are underreported in Pakistan, which are not focused upon and which are not talked about. And we're a recent initiative, and today we thought that we this because of this, the appetite for online consumption has increased, and there's a lot of online sort of debates that are ongoing. We thought we should add to the conversation and talk about issues which South Asia Press focuses on, which is Pakistan particularly, and talk about issues which are ongoing, and make this a weekly sort of talk. And today, for that reason, we're going to be starting our talk with Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, who's a renowned scholar, an author of Military Inc., one of the most comprehensive books on the Pakistan Army. And she's an academic, and she's currently associated with SOAS in London, where she's currently based out of. Welcome, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. And basically, the topic today we're going to be focusing on is obviously Pakistan Army, as I mentioned earlier, and Pakistan Army specifically under General Bajwa. We've seen that since General Bajwa sort of got an extension last year when he pushed for it, and earlier this year when the law was made for him for the extension, we've seen a lot of overt discussions in the international media and at home in somewhat, the local media is somewhat censored, but there is a lot of discussion about General Bajwa. And if you remember, actually, when General Bajwa came into when he took over as army chief at that time, there was this thing about the Bajwa doctrine, and we heard about it in local media. There was a piece done in a local newspaper by a journalist who went to meet him, and he mentioned that there is this Bajwa doctrine that we will see unfolding, and that was a few years ago. In your opinion, do you think this Bajwa doctrine really exists? What is the Bajwa doctrine? Do you think it's an extension of similar policies by previous army chiefs, or is Bajwa doctrine a completely new document? What is the end game of this Bajwa doctrine, please?
Right. Taha, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I know it's strange times. I hope we get a chance to meet, not just virtually, but otherwise, once COVID is no longer the threat for humanity. Um, Bajwa doctrine, let me remind you, I'm not sure that Bajwa doctrine got born in that way as a formula much talked about in Pakistan, but I would argue that it was born somewhere in the UK itself. Kamal Alam, a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute, was the first time who wrote about Bajwa doctrine. Now, Bajwa doctrine is something which has kind of unfolded slowly and gradually. And what we know about Bajwa doctrine is, firstly, initially as it started, was that it's about General Bajwa or the Pakistan Army telling the world to stop insisting on Pakistan doing more, and that Pakistan has done its bit. Now it's turn of the international community to do more. Uh, and so they ought to deliver as well as Pakistan. So not have a weak relationship, but a more kind of balanced relationship, so to speak. But then it unfolded a bit more, and then what its real picture got to be basically a more robust Pakistani state, which kind of uh, messaged us in a certain way and sent a certain message to the international community, which was that it should deliver to Pakistan as well. But internally, it meant a different kind of a leadership. It meant the army actually playing a more proactive role in countries' politics, and in fact, uh, pushing out uh, the traditional or the existing power political, pushing the existing major political parties and creating a new politics which would be seemingly cleaner, which would be less compromised, etc., etc. So basically, a more assertive military in both international politics as well as domestic politics.
Right. In that sense, I mean, when you say that this is basically a new political order, if I understand correctly, that Bajwa wants to sort of start domestically and then internationally, this image building exercise. If I may say so, and also asking the West to stop asking Pakistan to do more because it has done already enough, and rebranding itself as a country that has done enough. But in that sense, I mean, do you see that the way it has unfolded, has it been sort of a success story for Bajwa, or are there failures? Because there is a lot of negative attention that Bajwa has also gotten domestically and internationally, especially after his extension. So has General Bajwa managed to keep himself above the water? Is he successfully going forward? Yes, can you hear me? Dr. Aisha, can you hear me? Sorry, I think we're having some difficulties, technical difficulties. Dr. Aisha, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, Dr. Aisha?
Taha, firstly, again, let me get back to the history of what what we're familiar with in the form of Bajwa doctrine. The whole idea of yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear.
I think
Can you
there's a
hear
bit of a
me?
lag. Sorry. Yes, I can hear you now.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you. There is a bit of a disruption. I mean, there's a delay in when I hear you.
Yes, I understand, but please go on. Please go ahead.
Right. So basically, the rebranding of Pakistan. Uh, Pakistan had been fighting war on terror, and we will get down to discussing specific policies later. But the impression was that Pakistan, despite having done enough, I mean, if you let me, if you remember that, uh, from Rahil Sharif to from Kiani to Rahil Sharif and to General Bajwa, constantly what did come out of the GHQ was that Pakistan was a victim of terror, that it was wrong to accuse it of partnering with terrorists, with terrorists, right? Or that there was a problem with the argument that Pakistan was in fact aiding and abetting terror organizations like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jamaat-ul-Dawa, etc. And that Pakistan, being a victim, it had done enough and it shouldn't be pressured like that. So, and this need for the whole rebranding exercise, it had several dimensions. Rebranding was part of the conversation even under General Musharraf. And I remember that people close to the military establishment, civilians close to General Musharraf, people like, for example, Dr. Malia Lodi had written an entire book in which her thesis basically was that Pakistan needed to be presented differently. It needed to have an image makeover. Javed Jabbar talked about the same thing. I mean, he talked about Pakistaniyat. So there was an effort. You see an effort being made through the last, I would say, a decade and a half, in which the emphasis is Pakistan is a country where forget about what happens in terms of terror. You have fashion shows, you have literature festivals, you have so many other things happening. Pakistan needs to be looked at, and the world needs to look at Pakistan differently, like a very normal country. So that's the context, that's the background of why we hear about this rebranding. Now, what has happened instead is Pakistan got caught in, for example, the Financial Action Task Force. Involvement. So the weaknesses in Pakistan's laws, and therefore on money laundering, and therefore Pakistan went into from the period when Pakistan then moved into a grey list. It was being watched there were issues with that. So that happened, but also with with General Bajwa becoming much more, going to the forefront of politics. The whole idea of this hybrid government uh, did bring a lot of attention, brought a lot of unneeded attention to the military and to the country itself. So you didn't have, in fact, you didn't have those layers, you didn't have those additional layers between that you'd see in the past between the military and the civilian government. I mean, in the past, the civilian governments would partly be responsible for these policies, even sometimes when they were not responsible for certain action, because they were at the forefront of politics. Therefore, they were responsible for these policies. Now, in this case, with the PTI government, what we saw was military on the forefront. I mean, this hybrid government, which we're constantly told is civil and military on the same page. What we saw actually is a hybrid martial law kind of a situation. That brings additional attention to the military. It removes that that the layers that ought to be there, and therefore, yes, there's far more attention towards the military than ought to be. And so, even in case of common people, what we see is that today in streets of Pakistan, uh, people have no illusion. Uh, when Imran Khan makes mistake, when his government makes mistake, um, people know that it's not him alone; it's the military as well, which is responsible for those decisions.
Right. I mean, definitely there's there's conversation happening at a public level and much more openly that we're seeing. But I mean, of course, in the media, local media, we do not usually get to hear about it. And usually there is more glorification rather than this negative attention. Uh, in your opinion, some people say that this sort of opposition or this sort of negative attention that Bajwa has been recently getting with regards to the PDM, also with with Nawaz Sharif naming him, and before that we saw with JUIF doing the long march. So this political tension and rise of political opposition, and them also going for directly for General Bajwa, and starting from day one, sort of we saw even Bilawal Bhutto Zardari referring to Imran Khan as a selected prime minister, and so there's very obvious references to the military's interference now in the Pakistani politics, and it's increasing. Some people think in Islamabad that this is basically a fight between different generals, a fight between different sort of camps within the military. But sometimes we hear that the military is quite disciplined and very monolithic, and does not challenge its leadership in that way. You've studied the military for long, and you continue to study it. In your sort of opinion, do you think it's possible that the generals are fighting amongst themselves, and that's what we're actually seeing at most on in the narrative, in the public narrative?
Well, in the public narrative, we don't hear of the infighting. Now, different blocks within the military, that is certainly a possibility. Certainly a possibility in a bureaucratic institution which has strayed so far away from its main work of territorial security. I mean, today, let's not fool. Nobody can. Let's not fool ourselves in Pakistan. But the fact of the matter is that over years, the military has really drifted away from its key role, and it is a political army. It's a political army which has thought of very original ways of being in power without being in power. It has found ways this hybrid government is a way of control. Now, what it does to the military then is that it increases power ambitions. The problem right now is not just, General Bajwa's extension. Uh, it's also a problem that his Director General of an ISI wants to be the next army chief. And when you in a bureaucratic institution, when you leave so many things unsaid and unstructured, I mean, I think there is, for example, what is it? General Rahil Sharif apparently wanted an extension. General Kiani before him got an extension. General Bajwa has gotten an extension. And this is a period when we're not at war. I mean, 1965 war, there was a change of command. General, Yahya was, General Musa was inserted right in the middle of war. So commanders can be changed right in the middle of conflict. That was a bad decision then, but definitely we're not in a situation where commanders cannot come and finish their tenures and new ones take over. I mean, let's not forget that all officers, senior officers, get the same training, have the same experience, go through the same staff courses. So there is nothing which one general can do and another can't. Now, what has happened with this constant business of extension is that it has created tension internally. I mean, either there should be a change structurally, a dialogue between the military and the parliament, but within the military itself, in which the top brass and decides, or the parliament decides that, look, 3 years are not enough for a general. Let's have a longer period. Let's have a American formula, a 4 years or a 5 years period, longer period, right? But after that period is done, you go home. You don't get an extension. But if it's a matter for individual generals that there's a problem of in 3 years, then yeah, let's have a dialogue on that. Let's not hide behind every 3 years that, Pakistan is in danger, there's a conflict going on, and therefore you need to have continuity of command. It's a very silly idea the way it's being done. So, and I think it will lessen the instability within, or the schism within, the military as an institution. So I think what that has created, I mean, just imagine you put so many years, more than 40% of the army gets retired, at the rank of a major. Then there's a smaller number. It's a pyramid type organization. Smaller numbers get promoted to colonels, then to brigadiers and major generals, and then lieutenant generals, and finally out of that lot you select the first among equals kind of a thing, the army chief. Now you spend all those years hoping that one day you'll get to that position, and then you realize somebody has gotten an extension, and it's just one person who gets affected. There are people down below who get affected as well. I mean, every lieutenant general has a whole group of people around him, and at least there are more than 100 people who get affected by this kind of a decision, and therefore what you then see is tension within the institution. That's why what you see then is a push and pull within the institution. Therefore you see greater leaks coming out. I mean, when General Bajwa became the army chief, it was not ordinary you and I who kind of leaked information about his connection with a minority group. It was the information on him came from the army itself. Why does it happen? That's the question. I think this is a question which generals need to ask themselves. And greater politicization, therefore, is extremely problematic.
Right. So, I mean, coming back to an earlier idea that you mentioned, with the sense of this sort of rebranding and domestically sort of creating this hybrid regime. Um, in many we're also seeing that in Pakistan there's an low sort of incidence of terrorism domestically. The violence has gone down considerably compared to the previous sort of militaries and the recent military under Rahil Sharif, or before that under Kiani or Musharraf. The violence and the terrorism was quite high. So in that sense, I mean, some people also feel that General Bajwa has perhaps has had some success with it. How do you see that aspect of his policy? I mean, besides the politics that we just discussed, his terrorism policy, do you see that there is a change within that, and within the and is that part of the Bajwa doctrine framework in that sense?
I wouldn't just give it to one general, General Bajwa. It's a consistent effort that has gone into reducing terrorism. I mean, let's start from the point when General Kiani was very nervous of of undertaking operations in areas, because the main concern was that if you strike, if you say have operations in North Waziristan or South Waziristan, I mean, for years the debate was, why not Waziristan? Go to Waziristan. And the response would be, I mean, journalists like Najam Sethi, I remember on their shows, on their in their journal articles, would write about the impact it would have on Punjab. I mean, the fear was Punjab is the heartland of Pakistan. It is almost 90% Pakistan in terms of population. Sorry, that's too high a figure, but more than 50% Pakistan. So Punjab will get affected if you have operations somewhere else. Kiani had done operation in Swat, and how there was an increase in incidents of terrorism. But then, starting off, there's Rahil Sharif conducted a military operation. Different nomenclatures, Zarb-e Azab, and then you came to General Bajwa. Now, General Bajwa also made his contribution. So there has been this policy to reduce terrorism. We didn't start with General Bajwa, but its culmination may be General Bajwa. Also, what he signaled, or what we had, was his conversation with international leaders. Especially, he came to the UK twice, 2018 and 2019. And in that, what he signaled, what he told the leadership here, then he went to the US, was a promise that Pakistan will clamp down. And what we see, for example, in the past 6 months, we've seen, for example, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat-ud-Dawa domestically becoming less significant. I mean, from the point when these guys were socially very powerful, socio-politically they were powerful, they would be doing their jirgas, they would be running amok everywhere. From that to, we have recently seen sentencing of Hafiz Saeed. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that yes, that infrastructure has not been destroyed, but it has been rearranged in a way that there is, General Bajwa has managed to put a distance between, for example, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and Pakistan, and Pakistan military. Yes, I mean, he's done it, he's pushed, he's kind of delivered. But there are certain other groups, for example, like Jaish-e-Mohammed, which are still there. But again, that has been kind of slightly pushed back. So what he's done, and again, let me refer to the policies of General Bajwa. I mean, and before him, General Rahil Sharif, their response always to an international pressure that jihad factories should be shut down was that we will only target those that attack, Pakistan within, and that we're not going to create instability in Pakistan. Personally, as an analyst, as a Pakistani, when I look at this policy, I see problems in it. But for a minute, I would argue that this has worked. This has lowered, militancy within the country. This has lowered terrorism within the country. You don't see. I mean, just imagine from the point in 1990s or even 2000s when General Pervez Musharraf, the president and army chief, was attacked twice by terrorists. Now, from that point, and there was attack in Peshawar, there was attack in Lahore, terrorist attacks all over the place. Now, from that, the numbers have reduced. But things where military is not managed, for example, there is no counter extremism policy. There's also no complete abandonment of these groups. So that kind of is also there, and I see that as quite an issue. However, terrorism has been reduced, and that way, General Bajwa has delivered. But just to summarize what I've said earlier, I think this is a policy shift that had happened even before him, and it's a consistency that you see. The same policy of reducing terror, which had started before with Rahil Sharif and has continued.
But I mean, definitely, one thing that we do have to keep in mind is that also that they, as you mentioned rightly, that they've distanced themselves from some groups. But behind the scenes, there are those groups that continue to exist, and perhaps maybe some of them are now gone low profile or gone out of the scene. But for how long will we see that sort of this peace, and how sustainable that peace is a big question, because and recently, as I was reading that you had mentioned also you were commenting on it about the phenomena of Khadim Rizvi, and this idea of the military using new kinds of proxies in the mix to sort of create political pressures. So that's another thing that we're seeing. You just wrote about it, and you how do you see this whole phenomena of Khadim Rizvi and this idea of this blasphemy brigade, as they're called, and this blasphemy vigilantism that is domestically a big threat also, but becoming internationally a sort of concern, as we saw recently in Paris, where I am. There was a teenager, Pakistani youth, not a teenager. He lied about his age first, but 25-year-old, who said that he was inspired by the commentary and the literature and the sort of the narrative that Khadim Rizvi is propagating and spreading. So in that sense, how do you see this sort of change, and where do you see this headed, this policy, if you could tell us?
Taha, the point is that as I wrote in my piece, Khadim Rizvi represents the effect of a policy, he was not the cause of a policy. And the cause of the policy is really the state itself, the Pakistani state and its politics. Barelvis were not militant. I mean, he belongs to Khadim Rizvi, represents the Barelvi school of thought, which, by the way, our American friends during the War on Terror thought that Barelvis or Sufi Islam could be used structurally and institutionally as a bulwark against terrorism, against Deobandi terrorism, which, by the way, was created by a mix of ISI, CIA, Saudi intelligence, and much more. During the Afghan War of 1980s. So, decades later, Americans realized that no, there is a problem with that policy, which they had pursued, and therefore, Barelvi Sufi Islam could be used, and we saw American funding going into repair and maintenance of several shrines in South Punjab, where I come from. But that didn't line up the pockets of clerics like Khadim Rizvi, and it did not even reduce pressure on Barelvi clerics, in the sense that the power equation had become so twisted over years that Deobandis and Ahle Hadith, but especially Deobandis more than Ahle Hadith, would push out Barelvis from their mosques and from their madrasas. In 2006, that was the high point of this imbalanced policy, in which there was, in Nishta Park, Karachi, there was this terror attack in which 50 Sunni Barelvi leaders died in this terror attack. It was done by the Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan. Now, from that point onwards, they started to push back, and there was nervousness, there was agitation. They wanted to gain more power, and this is a period in which we saw change, a shift happening within the Barelvi ideology, Barelvi thinking, and all that one saw in the past kind of resurfaced. I mean, I was doing my field work, my research in Punjab, and what I figured out was that, for example, historically, by what I mean is modern history, post 1947, Barelvis and Shias used to be kind of much more aligned. That was gone. There was Barelvis wanted to have nothing to do with the Shias, but to have a separate identity. There was one, but the other was that they wanted to push back, and therefore, what we then saw was Barelvis also becoming militant, which was not the case before. And lo and behold, the state used them. Firstly, the state used that ideology. I mean, for example, it started to kind of accuse people, pick them up, accuse them. I mean, the famous case of the bloggers that were picked up in 2017. So these guys, when freed, were accused of blasphemy. This was the state using blasphemy to ensure that these people who had left the country would not return, or endangering putting their life in danger. So the state used it as a tool, one, but then it increased. And then what we saw was in 2017 again, the sit-in, this dharna against Nawaz Sharif government, in order to get rid of Nawaz Sharif. Khadim Rizvi was used. And what do you do? I mean, just compare it with what was happening during the 1980s. I mean, Deobandi Haq Nawaz Jhangvi, who became the head of Sipai Sahaba Pakistan, a Deobandi political militant outfit, which is the mothership of all Deobandi militancy in Pakistan, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Harkatul Ansar, Harkatul Mujahideen, all of those. He was, again, a small town cleric. He was somebody who would, he was not even a big, Maulana. He was not even a big scholar. And the state because of how they used him, turned him into a big figure. The same thing has happened with Khadim Rizvi. I mean, he could come to Islamabad, block Islamabad, uh, kind of drive, dictate the country's foreign policy. Um Tell Pakistan that, I mean, his last speech was fantastic. I mean, he was suggesting that Pakistan should use its nuclear weapons against France. So that kind of a thing. I mean, empowering these characters, use them politically, and the problematic part is that Pakistan is a state which for years has not really uh, distributed its resources well. And so Khadim Rizvi emerged as a person who, uh, who was representing this unrepresented people. And he gave them a political voice. It's just that the sloganeering was about blasphemy, which, uh, this is something which the state should be handling rather than an individual. So, my opinion is that this is an issue which is not going to a kind of go away. It's not going to disappear anywhere just because Khadim Rizvi died. But the other thing is that blasphemy as an issue is something which has been owned by other schools of thought as well. I mean, right now, for example, I was reading last week's Jaish-e-Mohammed magazine, in which it says the head that is not ready to roll, the head which is not ready to be cut, is not that of a Muslim, but of a blasphemer. So and Jaish-e-Mohammed is Deobandi. So they're owning it. Ahle Hadith militant organizations, even they're owning it. So this extremism and then primacy of religion. Uh, Pakistan is a Muslim state. It's been a Muslim state since 1947. It was created as one. But we are 73 years. We're at a point when the agenda of Islam is not entirely under the state's control. That's where the problem lies. Uh, Non-state actors, people like Khadim Rizvi, can give it direction, put the state in a position where it doesn't want to be. And I think that's extremely problematic.
Definitely. I mean, not just problematic, but I'd say it's quite dangerous because at the end of the day, this vigilantism that we've seen, and we've seen its effects in the sense of sort of vigilante killings in Pakistan. I mean, on university campuses with Mashal Khan that we saw in Peshawar was a result of this sort of radicalization. Because of this blasphemy sort of campaigning, and then internationally we're seeing such sort of actions, and as you rightly pointed out, I mean, all schools of thoughts are joining that bandwagon, because perhaps the traditional sort of way of jihadi sort of way of political Islam has been demonized so much and has been scrutinized so much that they're finding other causes to rally the Muslim population behind them. We have around 14 people watching us, around 14, 15 people watching us, and I would request them if they would like to send us some questions, because we're coming to the end of the conversation. I would like to sort of move back to sort of General Bajwa, as we were discussing. And one of I remember that when General Bajwa started this sort of his unfolding his methods of taking over, you came out with this term, the soft coup, and you mentioned right now also the hybrid system, and that's something that you've also written about. What is the future of this hybrid system and this soft coup? I mean, do you see that now in future we'll see the militaries under different leaderships continuing in this way? The hybrid regime is a thing to stay?
Right now, Yes. I mean, it's not going. I mean, we all get people observing Pakistan and Pakistanis in particular, we get excited. And therefore, when the Pakistan democratic movement started, um, one thought, "Wow, this is our moment," and it could be our moment. The question is, uh, what strength is being put in it. I would like to draw Taha your attention towards two things. Firstly, I think what the term I used is this is not hybrid democracy. Even the friends of the military, some of the known journalists, have written about this system and they've used the term hybrid democracy. Or a hybrid military rule. I call it, I believe in calling a spade a spade, and I'd call it a hybrid martial law. What we are looking at is a hybrid martial law. You have torture, you have disappearances, you have gagging of media, you have military dominating policy. Everything that you equate with the martial law is happening, except that there is a democratic government taking responsibility. So it's a hybrid martial law. Let's call it what it needs to be called. So there is there is that which ought to be understood. Secondly, I think it's important to understand that to fight that, you need a structural shift in politics. Political leadership, political party leadership in Pakistan has to kind of make a decisive pushback, uh, but also a decision that they will invest in party politics more, not negotiate and have secret deals, of course. But thirdly, find ways to engage with a military which is politically powerful. Look, Pakistan is not the first country which has seen military in power. Look at Latin America, look at South America, look at Southeast Asia. It's had this problem. You have to negotiate your way back into where political leadership belongs. And for that, it's a powerful institution. It's politically powerful institution. It's an institution with guns. So you have to debate with them. You have to dialogue with them. And when I say dialogue, it's not behind the curtain dialogue, but I think an understanding, slowly, gradually getting space. And for that, there has to be a more structural response. There has to be greater strength put into the parliament. Our parliaments completely are hands off as far as military is concerned. Now, you could also argue that when a political leader tried to do that, they embarrassed her. Benazir Bhutto, her first government, there were three things that she did. She changed the Director General of ISI. She replaced Hamid Gul with General Kallu, which she could do as a prime minister. The ISI comes under the prime minister structurally. Secondly, she set up an intelligence committee to analyze in the parliament to study how to kind of take away power from intelligence agencies. Thirdly, she wanted to replace, have a decision, replace Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, change General Sarohi. We saw pushback. I mean, what happened? 1990, Islami Jamhuri Ittihad, IJI was created, and now we know that General Asad Durrani, Lieutenant General Asad Durrani, and Mirza Aslam Beg, who was the army chief then, they actually used ISI to distribute money to politicians. Uh, Begum Abda Hussain is probably the only politician who's admitted that she got money from the ISI. But there's a whole list of names of people who got money, and it was to push Benazir Bhutto out of politics. That's a different time. That's a different time. But I think this kind of an adjustment, what is a role that intelligence agencies ought to play? Uh, the political leadership has to push back. The political leadership has to regain space that belongs to it. Under Rahil, under the previous government of uh, the third tenure of um, Nawaz Sharif, General Rahil Sharif took away one of the services of the civil services of Pakistan. Military land and cantonment is one of the 11 services of the civil service of Pakistan. We now have a major general in charge. Uh, no, that space doesn't belong to the military. Needs to be taken back. Ministry of Defense. The higher defense management structure was created by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The Ministry of Defense, the first Secretary Defense, I met him. The first Secretary of Defense was from the private sector, leave alone the bureaucracy. Until the mid 1990s, you had civil bureaucrats as secretaries, defense and defense production. Now it's not even imaginable. It's all military generals. No, this is a space which belongs to the civilian government. We need to do, the political parties need to do immense strengthening of the parliament. It needs to do strengthening of the bureaucracy, which is its eyes and ears for running the military. So all of these spaces need to be negotiated. It's not going to happen in a day. And you cannot have a negotiation, by kind of creating a lot of nervousness. It has to be done slowly and gradually. So that's one. I think the other thing, Taha, which we must realize is that in all these years that have gone by, the military has become so strong. It has so much ingress in the society that it's now not just an economic and a political player, it's also a societal player. You have military guys in the bureaucracy, you have military guys in media, you have military guys running your think tanks, they are running your universities. Everywhere you have military men or civilians who are completely besotted by military in power, and therefore they're worse than people in uniform. So that influence needs to be pushed back, and therefore we are at a situation where uh, it's become increasingly difficult to tell who is on my side and who is on their side, kind of a situation. uh, you'll have people who would be speaking your language, yet at some level doing the military's bidding. And therefore those social spaces need to be reclaimed. uh, I don't have any formula on how to do it, but I think the strengthening of politics, the strengthening of cadre-based political party system, uh, as political parties themselves get more powerful, I think this is eventually unions. I mean, there are no longer student unions. Labor unions are weak. So all of those places where a conversation happened uh, ended, and it has happened consistently. There is no dialogue. I think sadly what this military has done, not to its benefit also, is push the people who can talk and who can bring in alternative dialogue to the table, push them out. People are threatened. People are picked up. People are made to disappear. So and there is so much generation of fear that people are no longer. I mean, I was talking to a diplomat, by the way, and this person said and made a very interesting comment. And she said that look, she'd served. She'd come to Pakistan now, but she said that what she noticed was that the people who she could go and talk to, I mean, there were so many of them who are no longer there. So this is depriving your own country of your resources. And somehow that needs to change. And I think my only hope then tends to be the political parties who suffer themselves from a lot of weakness. But that's the only way one can think of.
Right. I mean, that basically sort of brings us to the last and the final question, which I wanted to sort of discuss with you, and it's a bit of on a positive note because we've been discussing critically the things that Bajwa has been doing, but of course, as you say, there has to be a pushback from the political side, and one of the questions that I would like to sort of focus on next is about the civil rights movements and the civil rights sort of pushback, the civil pushback from the civilians, and just corresponding with that, we also actually have a question from one of our audience, Patrick, who's watching. He says that thank you for this interesting conversation. GHQ and militant groups seem both to find common interest in their aversion for socialists, secularists, Democrats, and minorities. Where can Pakistan's liberal and progressives find the political capital to counterbalance this union of reactionary forces? Adding to that, Dr. Aisha, is also the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is one of the sort of movements which is ethnic in its nature for now, but has given a voice to people from across Pakistan. We've seen how they've mainstreamed, anti-military or critical to military slogans like "Ye jo dehshatgardi hai, iske piche vardi hai," and we see now those being echoed in Punjab at rallies which PMLN did in recent past. So, how do you see, firstly, with as Patrick asked about the political capital, where can we find that political capital? And within that, where do you see the PTM?
There's a lapse in. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think we are back to the problem that we had. Is it okay now?
Yes.
There's a bit of a delay. All right. Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, today, what the question which Patrick asked. The question that Patrick asked. I mean, today it's so interesting that to be considered a liberal is to put your own life in danger. There is this whole range of things happening. Yes, he's right. There is much in common continues to be in common between the military and the militants. They consider, it's less an issue of minorities, but more the liberals, those who believe in secularism, etc. The minorities then, in extension, kind of get targeted because of that. Anyway, how do you push back? And I think this is what I was drawing your attention towards. Political parties have to take on, unfortunately, greater burden than right now what they're prepared for. They have to have kind of adapt their structures. They have to have an opening within to bring on board to be more representative of people. Um, I'm not going to go into that. This whole debate of uh, democratization of parties and holding of elections and this, that, and the other. I think by nature, political parties are those animals with whom civil society can have a dialogue. And I think it's important to start that dialogue. I think with all those problems that political parties have, uh, it's important to kind of push them to learn that lesson, which they are being constantly taught for the last at least 60 years. That instead of cutting down each other, I mean, naturally they are naturally competing. I mean, I think there are nice things that are happening. There is this younger leadership. There is Bilawal. There's Mariam on the other hand. They have communication. They don't have that toxic relationship with their, which, for example, once upon a time, Benazir Bhutto, late Benazir Bhutto, and Mia Nawaz Sharif had. Things have changed. Build on that. There have to be multiple. There has to be new leadership within the parties. PMLN, for example, has to develop a cadre, which it lacks at the moment. PPP has to put back life into its cadre, which is not there. So there's a lot of work. How do you protect the minorities? How do you strengthen the civil society? It's not, we're looking at years ahead. We're not looking at months. We're not even looking at let Imran Khan go and somebody else come and take over. No, we're not looking at that. Imran Khan can go. He may complete his term. I'm for completing his term. But I think the more important thing is that even if they manage to remove this political government, there has to be a greater pressure for the military not to interfere in in the process of elections. There has to be much building of strength of the political structure. I mean, without that, you can't do much. Uh, Political parties themselves have to start a culture of hearing multiple voices. Where are those multiple voices within those political parties? I don't see think tanks within the political parties. They don't tend to get opinions. They don't get to hear conversations that are happening. I think if they start encouraging that, if they bring in the civil society on their side, civil society is theirs to take. And I think that initiative, unless that initiative is taken, uh, I don't see a lot changing dramatically.
And in that, just to add, do you see the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement playing a role in all of this, the PTM?
It's also their future. I mean, how do they now steer their future? Are they going to emerge into a political party, remain a political movement? I was talking to a friend yesterday, and one of the conclusions was that at some point they have to um kind of become representative uh, and join party politics. Um, what is their assessment, and these are answers that they have to find themselves. I mean, I am extremely indebted to Pashtun Tahaffuz movement for raising a voice at a time when voices had gone dead. I mean, these are people who have fought, who have shown that despite the military wanting them to take up violence, they refused. They continue to have a peaceful movement. That's their strength. They continue to ask for the constitutional rights. That's their strength. They raise their voices for the Pashtuns, but I'd argue that they raise the voice for rest of Pakistan as well. Uh, but they are again a limited, a small, ethnic group. For me, the question begins when the whole conversation which PTM is doing comes to mainland Pakistan. It comes to Punjab. The issue in Punjab is that people love. I mean, there's a lot of people who are, who follow the PMLN, who love Mia Nawaz Sharif in his politics, but who are also inclined towards the military. And the conversation has to start there, that the military will stay, or it can stay as long as it can limit itself to playing a certain role and no more. You cannot hide behind newer concepts of hybrid warfare, this warfare or that, fifth generation warfare and sixth generation warfare, and actually start attacking your own citizens. So all of that conversation has to come in. And, the thing, Taha, is that mainland Pakistan or Punjab has been psychologically trained in a certain way to think in a certain way for a very long time. It's much more sympathetic. I mean, you have plays that eulogize the military, the uniform, and criticizes the politicians. You have literature which does the same. So the minds are being framed in a certain way. That would have to change. So a lot needs to be done.
Definitely, a lot needs to be done, and some of it is what we're adding today to this conversation today. Thank you so much for taking out time to do this chat with me, this online talk with me, and thank you for all those who joined us today and sent us their questions.
Questions? Were they some
well,
interesting questions?
There was a question from Asha, but you already answered it, which was about Hafiz Saeed and the 10-year jail term that he's been awarded. But you already answered it, so I displayed it on the screen. There was one question from Patrick, and then a comment from Mansoor thanking us. But that was the only engagement through the comments. Otherwise, we had a few guests, and I think Mansoor wants to ask something. He's going to be asking us a question, so we'll just perhaps wait for him to ask us something. But I mean, definitely, this is the idea is that this kind of online talk is what we can add to sort of the debate, and perhaps what I will also be doing is that we'll be taking out smaller sound bites from your commentary and then resharing it on our pages so that people can benefit from specific responses that you gave. Mansoor says that he's a PhD candidate at York in the UK, and we're just waiting for him to send us his question. I'm just going to see if it's on Facebook already. We don't see it yet, but we're going to give it a few seconds and wait for it. Patrick is also actually someone that has written. He's written a thesis on the way the ISI works in Pakistan, and I met him a few years ago when I arrived in France, in Paris. And he's been doing interesting work on the Pakistan military, which is a subject that in France very few sort of talk about or focus on. Although,
Taha, I'll tell you something. I think this is something which we need to think about in a civil society space, so to speak. I mean, look, intelligence agencies are very powerful. I mean, 1920s, the British intelligence actually pushed out Lloyd George. The FBI made Truman lose elections. So these are democratic states. And so democratic states, they have problem. Poor democracies, weak democracies like Pakistan, it's a bigger problem. And I think this is a question which political leaderships have to ask themselves. This is a question which we should, I think, at the level of a civil society, need to kind of engage in. What are the limits for an intelligence agency? What can the parliament do, for example? Something needs to be done. You have to limit it. Putting the ISI under Ministry of Interior, not the answer. Diverting planes is definitely not the answer. There's a more structural way that the political leadership needs to take on the military. It needs to take it on. I think what the problem with the rhetoric, the problem with with the nature of propaganda that the military is now responsible for, is that besides what it does to politics, it's blinding the military as well. It's singular voices. It's just one thing, and therefore it can't even hear anything different. It cannot even do damage control to itself. So it needs to be taken away from power and return to those proverbial barracks where it just does what it's trained to do. And I remember many years ago somebody asked this question. That what militarily is, in terms of training, what kind of a military would I want? And I said, this is exactly the military I'd want. But minus its political, economic, societal role. Let it dedicate itself. And this is a pushback which needs to come from all levels, from civil society and also from political leadership.
Right. We do have now a question from Mansoor. He's asking, don't you think electoral politics is under transition in a domain democracy in Pakistan, where people seem to stick with political leaders and support their narratives? The example of Nawaz Sharif against political guardians.
Yes and no. Mansoor, very simply, yes and no. We know that people have welcomed Nawaz Sharif's call. They have been, there's a general nervousness about this hybrid regime, and therefore, and things are going to possibly, one of the scenarios is that things are going to possibly get even worse as economic conditions deteriorate, and therefore people will much more intently look at the opposition, which is Mia Nawaz Sharif here. PPP perhaps has a lesser role, but more PMLN. But the thing is that that's just the entry point. It's like getting into a conversation. It's like saying, I'd get quiet, you had quietened me, and now, you have, I can now open my mouth and say things. That's one. The other is then what you do, what structures do you build to be able to push the military back. I would like to see greater investment by Mia Nawaz Sharif. I know he means well. I would like him to invest his energy in thinking about the party political structure, uh, his own party political structure. Uh, I'll tell you something. I mean, way back 2006, uh, the Charter of Democracy between Benazir Bhutto and uh, Mia Nawaz Sharif was very encouraging. So we took that step, but then we, took two steps backwards. Uh, I hope we've learned this time. I hope that despite the differences, despite their ideological differences, despite that in an election they'll be competing against each other, they'll be fighting each other tooth and nail. Despite that, there's a certain modicum of a decency that they manage to retain to invest, I'd say again and again and again, invest in their political structures, invest in the kind of politics which it increases the outreach to people. People are not pariahs. People are not pariahs that can only be used during elections and then no more. Their conversation has to be brought in and implemented. So that kind of a structure, a lot of work needs to be done, and I hope Mia Sahab can return to Pakistan, work on can set about doing that. And I wouldn't even expect. I wouldn't be over ambitious about how far he can go. But even if there are certain things that are done in the party, which gives me some hope that yeah. So Mansoor, going back to your question, I mean, if you think that I'm like super excited that yes, this is the moment of shift, no, it's not. But is this the moment for perhaps the beginning? Then I'd say yes.
Right. We have two more comments, and then with that, we will wrap up the conversation. We have one comment from on Raza, who's a friend, and he basically says, "Would Dr. Aisha consider education, especially of history, as an ingredient for long-term progress in Pakistan? Would you consider video sessions like these about Pakistan history?" Targeted towards Pakistanis with a broader global historical context so that people can make better sense of what lies in the genesis of the country and its popular view of recent history. So that's more of a suggestion of what to do. I think what needs to be done, perhaps. The other comment we have. Yes, please go ahead.
Can I have a 30-second quick intervention? Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think it's a brilliant idea, and there's an when you have this conversation with young Pakistanis, the response you always get, no, we know what has happened. Now tell us what needs to be done. I think history and understanding of history and that is important, but the other thing which is important is that history or discussion of politics is not meant to make a policy framework and say, now these are the 10 things that we need to do to regain our political power or wrest political power from the military. Each one will have to come up with their own solutions, but that conversation definitely, which includes a discussion of history of Pakistan's politics, is important.
Definitely. We have one comment and sort of a question that you've probably addressed a little bit before also, but perhaps you would like to add something to it. It's from Marvi, our friend Marvi Sarmat. She says, hi, great discussion. Thanks. My question is, now that the military establishment has complete control on almost every gateway of information and expression? Do you think civil society can somehow take it back just through negotiations? And she adds to that, saying politicians do not seem interested in putting it on the table as key point to negotiate, it seems.
My dear friend Marvi, I think the thing is, when we say negotiate, it's not chatter, chatter, talk, talk. It will have to be done in a structured way. So, what do you do? I mean, once there is a change of government, what do you do with organizations like PEMBRA? What do you do with different laws? Civil society on its own, I don't think it will. It has a chance. I mean, look at what has happened recently. There was a group of journalists that went to the Islamabad High Court, against these changes in social media laws in Pakistan. And before they could even file the writ petition, 4 journalists withdrew. There were pressures. I think we need a partnership here. There's a partnership. The state of Pakistan's institutions is such: judiciary weakened, civil bureaucracy weakened, media weakened. On each one of us, civil society, media, judiciary, none of us can go and fight this battle alone. There has to be a partnerships. And let's not forget, the key forum that is A, responsible, B, has the potential. We could argue that it doesn't seem to be that powerful at the moment, but it has to develop that. But the only forum that will have the ability to fight, which can structurally do that fighting, is the parliament and the political parties. And I think this is our first conversation. Let there be many more in which we come up with ideas on how to go about it.
Right. Thank you so much. Marvi says she's also part of that petition, and through Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, who are part of that petition. But thank you so much, Dr. Aisha, for joining us and taking time out for this very insightful and sort of in-depth discussion. Most of the time, we see these small sound bites on television with 30 seconds or a minute to explain issues which are quite long and which need a detailed kind of breakup, as we did in this sort of discussion today for the last hour and a half. And hopefully you can join us again in future, and all of our audience also, if you can join us again in future. We'll be doing this as a weekly thing with different speakers from Pakistan and talking about issues on Pakistan. Thank you everyone for joining us, and hope to see you again.
Thank you, Taha.